Hi everyone, it's William with the Grand Duke Dmitri Diary and Letter YouTube series. We're continuing on with the fairly long letter of 23rd of September 1939. We're drawing close to the end, maybe another 2 sessions. So what is our recap from the last section of the letter? Well, Dmitri was and still is describing his first night as a sanatorium patient. He had a nurse whom he referred to both as Nyanya, nanny. She reminded him of a Russian peasant nanny. And he also referred to her as a schoolmaster because he needed to learn how how people live in sanatoriums and what the regimen is. He was already feeling better. He was clearly in a good mood as he was writing this. Bedtime was 9 o'clock, and so he adhered to that clearly and went to bed. And he described it in his letter to Maria as the first night of my entire life in a hospital. He'd initially told her, well, this is really more like a hotel. But then when he, sort of looked around and got and adapted to it, he changed and said, well, this really is a hospital after all. Okay, so that's where we left him, in bed. And we resume with him in bed. Here we go. And fear gripped me once more, the fear that comes by night when I ask myself how I will leave this place and when. It was horrible, and I pitied myself and Polly. I was terribly sorry for you! Exclamation point. I got out of bed and went out on the terrace. It was a splendid night, moonless but clear, and the irresistible desire to pull through rose up again and seized me with extraordinary strength! Exclamation point. I went back into the room, fell to my knees, and thanked the one whom I call God for everything that had happened. For example, that I arrived here on the last train, that Grunwald was able to get me a visa at the last minute, and then in parentheses he puts, without Konstantin Konstantinovich, I would not be here in Davos, and that this sanatorium is open while almost all the others are closed and the doctors here were not called up. Triple exclamation point. So that's what I gave thanks for, and I asked that passionate, deep-seated drive to pull through should not be taken from me! Exclamation point. It was almost mystical. From that Sunday, 3rd September, until now, a period of exactly 3 weeks, I've been lying on my back, and apparently will continue to lie for a long time. I get up only to take a bath in the morning, shave, and use the toilet. Here's how I'm feeling now. I no longer cough and clear my throat only rarely. I've stopped spitting, even in the morning, after 10 years of having done so, and bringing up horrible pus. So I've stopped spitting, even in the morning, and bringing up horrible pus, and then he interrupts that with this after 10 years of having done so, in parentheses. Here they measure how much you spit, and for the first 4 days I was bringing up the maximum. I eat almost every 3 hours, and for the first time in my life, I am hungry for breakfast. Really hungry! Exclamation point. On the 3rd day, my temperature was normal all day long, and so it continues. The pain in my chest is gone, and since I almost never cough, the pain in my bronchi has also gone away. The senior doctor said, and he puts this in quotes, I have rarely, very rarely, had the opportunity to observe a patient such as you. You have the constitution of a horse and an absolutely phenomenal heart. End of quote. I must pull through. I wish to pull through. Amen. Mysticism? And then he puts 2 exclamation points, a question mark, and ellipses, 3 dots. And the doctor himself knows it. Mysticism and the doctor himself knows it, but officially speaks only about the horse-like constitution and extraordinary heart. As for the nurse with the mustache, for some reason she speaks to me in English. She said, in quotes, "What a strange person you are. You could have been months here and not have done such progress. I must pull through!" Exclamation point. Okay, as you can see, either the nurse spoke not great English or Dmitri still, his English was still quaint. I think this was probably him when he thought back to what she had said and wrote it down. He wrote it in a way that a native English speaker would not say it. What a strange person you are. You could have been months here and not have done such progress. So you could have been here for months and not have made such progress is how it should be, but that's okay. He does pretty well overall. Okay, so let's talk about this. The fear that comes by night, very poetically put. He has described that earlier in this letter, that this is when he had the hardest time, when he was alone in his room at night in bed, and that was when this fear of death really gripped him. That's understandable. And so now the things that he's grateful for, he should not be getting out of bed. That's clear. But he wakes up, or no, he doesn't say. Does he say he wakes up? No, he had this irresistible, it sounds like, kind of desire, need to get out of bed, go out on the terrace onto this balcony, look out on this beautiful moonless but clear night, and it clearly inspired him. And then he had the irresistible desire to pull through. It rose up again and seized me with extraordinary strength. So he's having these kind of transcendent or ecstatic experiences that he relates to the mystical, which is very interesting, I think. And there's something called spastica. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's Latin. It means the hope of the tubercular. And there was this idea that people with tuberculosis, because of the fever and what the disease was doing to them, would have these ecstatic states from time to time. And this certainly fits that, although I don't know that I would necessarily say that's a correct attribution. Maybe it is common to any person with a potentially terminal disease to have these moments. And Dmitri, as we know, was a student of mysticism. He'd been with this Hindu practitioner on the Red Sea. He read these various sort of occult books like In Tune with the Infinite. It's a very interesting experience. He feels kind of one with the universe almost, and he looks at, the things that he's grateful for. The list of them. One being that, he got on the last train. According to him, I think it's doubtful that it was the last train from Paris to Zurich or wherever it was he went, what route he took. For the visa, yes, that was indeed something to be grateful for. He only had a Nansen passport. He was a stateless person, but Konstantin Grunwald had diplomatic ties and had been a diplomat himself, so Konstantin helped him to get that, and that was, a bit of luck, or however you want to put it. And the other thing that he's thankful for is that Schatzhelp was open. And he writes, almost all the others are closed, almost all the other sanatoriums, and that simply wasn't true. They weren't. But, he'd heard that. And he was grateful, and good for him. So we're turning to, then he starts the next paragraph. Well, I'll just say that pull through is kind of his mantra, and he had used literal mantras that he'd written for himself back in 1917, and now he's using this as a kind of mantra. I have a deep-seated drive to pull through. So that drive is precisely what he's been told in these various readings, that if you direct your will and your thoughts towards something, then it will in fact turn out the way you want it to. But whenever you hear that pull through, he's writing it in English, and he says it repeatedly. I also wanted to note this idea that he felt sorry for himself, he felt sorry for Polly, and he felt sorry for Maria. So why Polly and Maria? I think because he considered them to be the two people that were dependent on him. And you know, not in Polly's case, certainly not for his well-being, in the sense of he would always be taken care of financially. He didn't have any worries about money then or in the future. But at this time when he was writing this, Dmitri still had full custody of Polly. And so this idea that he might die or even be at a sanatorium for years, he looked at Polly as a dependent who was going to suffer because of this. And it's more interesting that he was looking at Maria as a dependent. Maybe not. He hadn't been generous with her apparently in the past. When she wanted money, he had not shared his, but she may have had a rosier idea of what his finances were like than they actually were. But anyway, she's his sister. He sees her, it's clear through various other writings, as a vulnerable person, and so she's a kind of dependent too. Okay, so now we have this long paragraph where he talks about his health, and I should have warned you in advance that it would have some kind of, unpleasant physical things. One is this idea of bringing up not just phlegm, but also pus from the infection, and he told us that he'd been doing this for about 10 years. And the idea was, what the doctors told him is that he had probably had TB for about 10 years in a sort of slow chronic course that had finally turned into the kind of TB that eats cavities in your lungs. That gives us a time frame. This is 1939, so it was probably around 1929 that the disease became active in his body, but in a mild way. And now he's only spent his first night in the sanatorium. Well, no, because he's talking about the first 3 weeks. And already he's been put to bed. He's not supposed to be getting out of bed except once in the morning, I guess, to take a bath and shave and use the toilet. But he probably got up to use the toilet whenever he needed to. But that in itself is an interesting detail. And this is a clear difference from what I've seen in my research between life in a private sanatorium and life in a public sanatorium. Because new patients in a private sanatorium, they had to lie flat on their back, and he does describe that, lying on my back. They were not allowed to sit up until their fever had gone down or they'd made some kind of progress, and then they could sit up for 15 minutes a day. And they strictly used bedpans. They weren't allowed to get up when they needed a bath. They were taken in on like a gurney and bathed and brought back. And that's obviously not the case. I mean, patients in a private sanatorium would probably say, right, the hell with it. A lot of them, I'm not going to stay here. I'll go find a sanatorium that will not be quite so strict. So Dmitri could get up. It's not clear if it was only once in the morning and otherwise he had to, use a bedpan or whatever. I don't think so, because I think he would have said that. But he was absolutely not allowed to sit up at his desk. He would have had an escritoire or a desk in the room and write this letter or do anything else. And so he'll talk about that later when he's allowed to sit up at his desk. So he spent 3 weeks basically on his back. But, he's in a good mood. He's handling it very well. He feels better, and so that's probably a big part of it. He sees that it's working. So they're measuring the sputum, the spit, and at first he was bringing up the maximum amount, but only for 4 days, and then he started getting better. He's eating every 3 hours. That was part of the cure. This is before antibiotic treatment, and so the rest was part of the cure. Another part of the cure was that they stuffed you because, the non-scientific name that was used at that time for tuberculosis was consumption, because people wasted away. So they just stuffed you as much as you could keep down. And not only is he complying with that and eating every 3 hours, but he says that he's actually hungry, really hungry for the first time in my life, hungry for breakfast. I would add that, the fact that he says that this spitting started 10 years ago is a pretty good indication that the idea that he had tuberculosis as a young man, still in Russia before the revolution, is simply not true. He didn't have night sweats. He didn't have this spitting that he would have had if he'd had even a light case of tuberculosis back then. Okay, and so it only takes 3 days for his temperature to go back to normal. He really is doing very well. And then he gets this, both the doctor and the nurse talk about how extraordinary this is. And the doctor says, you have an incredible constitution. You have the constitution of a horse, and you have this, how does he say, extraordinary? This extraordinary heart. And I can believe that. You may say, well, this man died at 50. But given that he was a lifelong smoker, I believe a heavy drinker, and that he had not only tuberculosis, but a co-infection, according to Dr. Maurer, of gangrene in his lung, the fact that he was able to survive that, and he did survive that. His pulmonary tuberculosis became quiescent, and then he died of kidney failure. The kidney failure may actually have been caused by the surgery that he had for the pulmonary tuberculosis. It can cause that effect. It can stress other organs. But he clearly did have a strong heart and a good, strong constitution if he was able to live with tuberculosis for 10 years and then actually survive it. So I don't think the doctor was lying to him in that respect, but it's very interesting how he frames it, that officially the doctor says it's because the doctor only talks about physical things, your constitution and your heart. But, and Dmitri underlines this, the doctor himself knows. So he follows up with that mysticism, double exclamation point, question mark, and the doctor himself knows it. So he's saying, yes, there is some kind of mystical thing that I'm tapping into that is allowing me to make this incredible, rapid advance. And the doctor knows it. All right, so that's interesting. Yeah, the nurse with the mustache. This is the second time he calls her that. Apparently he's very impressed by that mustache. And he notes that she speaks English for some reason, as he puts it. And I'd love to know more about her. I mean, that's one of the things that my research has very frustratingly not only about this nurse, but about the nursing staff in general. I've learned a lot about the doctors and even the business and housekeeping staff, but the nurses, I don't know. Were they local women? Did they come from other places? Why did she speak English to him? Was it merely because she was an English speaker and she knew that that English was a language that he was very comfortable in? She didn't speak Russian, he didn't speak German, not really. That would make sense, but it surprises him. Apparently she's not an English woman, but for some reason he says she speaks English to him. Maurer spoke French to him. Maybe she didn't speak French. Okay, so once again, I've gone 20 minutes. What do we have next time? Well, he's going to tell us more about his physical state and what the doctor has to say about it. He's so thrilled with what's going on, and he's going to tell us about some of the treatment that he's getting that are a bit shocking from a modern perspective. So anyway, do come back for that, and I'll see you next time. Bye.